So you react to a totally harmless comment from a loved one.
Right, or maybe just like a minor shift in a project at work.
Yeah. And suddenly your heart is just racing, your words get sharp, you're entirely overwhelmed.
And even as it's happening, there's this quiet, observing part of your brain just watching you.
Exactly. Just watching and thinking, like, why am I doing this? Why can't I stop?
It is, it's just this profound disconnect. You are simultaneously the person losing control and, the captive audience to your own reaction.
Yeah, that's a good.
Watching your hands shake, you hear your own voice raise an octave, and you just feel entirely helpless to intervene in the behavior of your own body.
It feels intensely familiar. I mean, I think anyone who has ever been, exhausted or stressed or pushed just an inch past their breaking point knows exactly what that room feels like.
Oh, absolutely.
And when this happens, when you're the thick of that sudden storm, there are really two honest ways to understand it. The first way, which is honestly how it usually feels in the aftermath, is that you are experiencing this profound loss of identity and emotional control.
It feels like a total identity crisis.
It really does.
Yeah.
You look back at how you reacted, like maybe you slammed a door or you sent a deeply uncharitable email, and you just think, I don't know the person inhabiting my body right now.
Yeah, the shame that comes with that is heavy.
It is. There's this huge wave of shame, this disorientation, a feeling of a fractured self. It's a deeply relational lens because the fallout almost always impacts the people around you.
Right. It fundamentally shakes your understanding of who you are in relation to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then there's the second way to understand it.
Yeah, the biological and research lens, which is honestly quite different.
Totally different.
From this perspective, the brain isn't broken in this moment at all. It is, in fact, executing a terrifyingly precise ancient survival protocol.
Like it's doing exactly what it was designed to do.
Exactly. The machine is acting with absolute ruthless efficiency. It's actively cutting off the parts of you, the nuanced personality, the logic, the higher level reasoning, the empathy that it deems completely useless for immediate physical survival.
Wow. So we are looking at a massive tension here today.
A huge one, yeah.
It is the clash between what we might call the narrative self.
Yeah.
Who we believe we are, our logic, our carefully curated identity. The person who doesn't yell at their partner overloading the dishwasher.
Right. The adult in the room.
Yeah. And on the other side, the survival self, which is our raw biological threat response.
And to try and understand this impossible tension, we've pulled together an incredibly diverse stack of research today.
So much research.
We're looking at clinical frameworks on life transitions, neurobiological studies on the default mode network, and memory systems.
Oh, the memory stuff is wild.
It really is. Plus, economic theory on immediate gratification and psychological data on the amygdala hijack.
Our whole mission in looking at all these sources is to uncover why the brain fractures our sense of self under pressure, and how we can sit with both a biological reality and the emotional grief of that exact experience.
It is a really delicate balance trying to hold both of those truths simultaneously. They pull you in completely different directions when you're trying to make sense of your own behavior.
They really do.
One demands that you take moral inventory of your actions, and the other demands that you recognize yourself as, well, a biological organism responding to stimuli.
So let's start with the narrative side, the felt experience of losing yourself.
Yeah.
Because that's the reality we wake up to the next morning,
The
right?
hangover of the reaction. Yeah.
Right. So if we look at the clinical frameworks on life transitions, specifically the work of William Bridges and Herminia Ibarra, we start to see this phenomenon through the lens of self-concept.
Which is such a helpful framework.
It is. When you go through a major change, say you lose a job, you relocate to a new country, you become a parent, or experience a significant shift in your health, your self-concept doesn't just get bruised, it gets severely disrupted.
Because self-concept is essentially the accumulated story you carry about who you are. It's the psychological scaffolding of your day.
Exactly, the scaffolding.
It's built on your roles, your specific competencies, your daily routines, and crucially, the feedback loop from society that validates those roles.
Right, like when you walk into an office and people ask you questions because you're the expert in a certain department, society is handing you back a reflection of your identity.
Yes, and when that environment is removed, the reflection just vanishes.
Poof. Gone. And William Bridges makes this brilliant, really vital distinction in his work between change and transition.
Right. They aren't the same thing at all.
Not at all. Change is situational. It's external. It's the The new job title on your email signature, the new zip code on your mail, the medical diagnosis printed on a piece of paper. The change is the event that happens to you.
But the transition, that is what happens inside you as a result.
Yes. Transition is the slow, grueling psychological process of adapting to the change. And Bridges breaks this down into 3 phases.
Okay, so walk us through those.
First, there's the ending, where you just have to let go of the old identity. Then there's the neutral zone. And finally, way down the road, there's the new beginning.
And that middle phase, the neutral zone, that is what typically causes the most severe psychological distress.
Oh, absolutely. It is a period of immense vulnerability.
Why is it so intense?
Well, the neutral zone is the absolute core of this identity crisis. Think of it like this.
Oh.
You are walking across a massive suspended bridge that is completely shrouded in a thick fog.
Okay, I can picture that.
You know exactly what you've left behind on the shore. That's the ending. You can see the faint outline of the person you used to be. But you cannot see where you are going.
Because of the fog.
Right. The new beginning is completely invisible in the mist ahead of you. You are suspended in this disorienting, empty space over the water, where the old rules of your life no longer apply, but the new rules haven't been written yet.
That sounds terrifying, honestly.
It is. And here is where it gets really interesting in the literature. Positive thinking completely fails here.
It generally does, yeah. Because positive thinking usually relies on affirming an existing, coherent narrative.
Right. You use positive thinking to bolster a story you already believe about yourself.
Exactly. But in the neutral zone, the narrative itself is broken. There is nothing to bolster.
You can't just slap a good vibes only sticker on a fractured identity.
No, you really can't.
The disruption of your identity in this fog isn't a sign that you are failing at resilience. The disruption is the actual work of the transition.
That's a huge point from Herminia Ibarra's research.
Yeah, she shows that when people undergo major career changes, they experience profound disorientation. Not because they lack the technical skills for the new path, but because their sense of self was entirely load-bearing on the role they just left.
The foundation was the old job.
Right.
Yeah.
And that gap between the old identity and the new one takes time to cross. Research suggests it takes 1 to 3 years to rebuild this internal orientation.
1 to 3 years, wow.
It is not a weekend project. So when you snap at your partner or feel completely overwhelmed by a minor shift in a project at work from this relational lens, it's because you are walking on a foggy bridge.
You're carrying the heavy grief of an ended identity.
Exactly. Trying to force a clarity that just isn't there yet. You're exhausted by the sheer act of not knowing who you are.
That is a deeply empathetic way to view the psychological weight of a transition. The grief of losing that societal feedback loop is very, very real.
It's heavy.
But if we pivot and look at the biological override, I have to push back a little on the idea that this is entirely a narrative struggle.
Okay, let's hear the biology side.
The intensity of that moment you described at the very beginning, the racing heart, the sharp words, the complete inability to stop yourself from lashing out, that isn't just a psychological fog.
What is it then?
It is a physical, structural lockdown of the brain's higher processing centers. It's what Daniel Goleman famously coined in 1995 as the amygdala hijack.
Right, the amygdala hijack. So if the amygdala is dumping adrenaline and cortisol into the system, that can't just be an emotional shift. That has to physically alter how the machinery runs. Right?
Exactly.
Because it feels like your working memory just evaporates. Walk us through the actual plumbing of that. What is happening in the brain when we feel that fog roll in so fast and so aggressively?
To understand the hijack, you have to look at the normal pathway of how your brain processes the world around you.
Yeah, the normal route.
Usually, sensory information comes in, you see an email, you hear a sarcastic comment, and it travels straight to a part of the brain called the thalamus.
The thalamus, got it.
You can think of the thalamus as the grand central station of sensory input. Its job is to sort the data.
Sort them out, basically.
Right. Normally, the thalamus routes that information up to the higher cortex, specifically the frontal lobes. That is your logical, reasoning, sophisticated brain.
Okay, so that's where the adult in the room lives.
Yes. Your frontal lobes receive the data, analyze the tone of the comment, recognize the broader context of the relationship, and decide on a measured, appropriate response.
That's the narrative self in action. It's rational. It has perspective. It remembers that we love the person making the sarcastic comment.
But during an amygdala hijack, that entire sophisticated process is completely dismantled.
Wait, really? Dismantled how?
The thalamus perceives a severe threat. Historically, this meant a physical predator, like a tiger. But in modern life, the threat is usually psychological, like an attack on your ego, a sudden overwhelming pressure at work, or a deeply triggering memory of past abandonment.
So the brain reacts to a bad email the same way it reacts to a tiger.
Yes, essentially. When the thalamus perceives this high-level threat, it makes a rapid, unconscious efficiency calculation. It decides that sending the signal up to the logical frontal lobes for analysis would be a dangerous waste of precious
Oh,
milliseconds.
wow. So it just skips it.
It routes the signal directly to the amygdala, bypassing the higher cortex entirely.
It just cuts the logical adult brain completely out of the loop.
Entirely. The amygdala is this almond-shaped structure deep in the limbic system, and it is the emotional hub. Its only job is instant survival.
Just keeping you alive.
Right. And the moment it gets that direct, unfiltered signal from the thalamus, it initiates the fight or flight response. It triggers an absolute flood of stress hormones and enzymes into your bloodstream, specifically epinephrine, which is adrenaline, and cortisol.
And what does that chemical flood actually do to the physical structure of our thoughts in that split second? Like, why do I go blank?
It literally physically alters your capacity to think. The immediate biological result of an amygdala hijack is a massive depreciation in working memory.
So that's why I can't remember my point in an argument.
Exactly. The reason you can't think clearly, the reason you can't find the right words or see any alternative solutions to the conflict in front of you is literally because your frontal lobes have been biologically disabled by these hormones.
Biologically disabled. That is terrifying.
Blood flow has physically shifted away from the cognitive centers and toward the motor cortex and survival systems. The system is designed to make you react, to fight, or to run, not to reflect.
Wow.
So that quiet, observing part of your brain that's wondering, why can't I stop? That is the tiny, struggling remnant of your higher cortex. It's just sitting in the passenger seat watching a very ancient, very powerful survival mechanism drive the car off a cliff.
Okay, wait, I'm struggling with this.
What part?
If this is just a mechanical override, just a squirt of cortisol and adrenaline into the bloodstream, it should feel like a muscle spasm. It should feel like a sneeze or, I don't know, a reflex.
I see what you mean.
But it doesn't. When this happens, it feels deeply, horribly personal. It feels like my actual soul is fracturing. It shatters our sense of who we are in relation to others. How can a chemical dump explain an existential crisis?
That is the pivotal question of this entire deep dive, and it's exactly where the biological and the psychological lenses crash into each other.
So there was a bridge between the two.
Yes. The answer lies in something called the default mode network, or the DMN. This brings us to the research of Aldrich Chan, who studied the DMN's role particularly in relation to trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder.
If you like sitting with questions that don't resolve easily, you're in the right place. Because this feels like it's about to get complicated. The default mode network. I've heard this mentioned in passing, usually in articles about like daydreaming or what the brain does when it's bored.
Daydreaming is a very small part of it. The DMN is a widespread network of interacting brain regions that is highly active when you are awake, but not actively focused on a specific task in the outside world.
So when you're just existing.
Right, but it's much more profound than just idle mind wandering. According to Chan's research, the DMN is the neural system fundamentally responsible for your sense of self.
Wait, really? The biological center of self?
Yes. It handles autobiographical recall, your memories of who you are, the narrative arc of your life, and where you've been. It handles self-referential processing, which is the mechanism of how you relate the external world back to yourself.
Okay.
It's responsible for perspection, which is your ability to imagine your future. And crucially, it is deeply involved in social cognition and moral sensitivity.
Oh, wow. So the DMN is essentially the biological address of the narrative self. It's the physical neighborhood where the story of me lives in the brain.
That's a perfect way to put it. It supports your entire internal reflective capacity. It connects your self-functions with how you navigate relationships and empathize with others.
So what happens to that neighborhood when the alarm goes off?
Now, here is what Chan's research reveals about trauma and intense prolonged stress. It physically alters the DMN.
It alters it.
Experiencing acute trauma, or even chronic, overwhelming stress like the kind you might experience wandering in the fog of the neutral zone for a year, results in overall reductions in DMN activity, volume, and internetwork connectivity.
Wait, so the neighborhood actually breaks down?
The DMN literally becomes incoherent. The neighborhood goes dark.
The biological center of my identity powers down.
Mm-hmm.
That is staggering.
It is. Chan describes a condition called a traumatized resting state, or TRS. In this state, because the DMN, the network of the self, is powered down, another network powers up to take its place.
Which one?
That is the salience network, which is entirely dedicated to threat detection and scanning the environment for danger.
Wow.
So to answer your existential question about why the biological override feels so personal, the loss of identity isn't just a metaphor. When you are under intense pressure, your brain's self-network is physically shutting down to conserve metabolic resources for threat detection.
Because what you are saying is that the terrifying feeling of losing myself, of not knowing who I am when I snap at my partner, is a biological reality.
Exactly.
The part of my brain that holds the files on who I am and who I love is literally offline.
It is offline. And the part of your brain that treats the world as a potential danger is fully online and running the show.
So if the me network is offline and the threat detector is running the show, how does that explain why we suddenly make terrible impulsive decisions when we're stressed?
That's a great transition into the patterns.
Yeah, let's look at how these two lenses, the disruption of the narrative self in the neutral zone and the biological lockdown of the amygdala and the DMN, actually show up in our daily habits. We have a fascinating neuroeconomic study here from Harvard looking at the war over gratification.
This explores how the brain balances near-term rewards against long-term goals, which is a classic neuroeconomic dilemma.
The setup in the study is incredibly simple, right?
Very simple. Consumers are offered a choice between a smaller reward right now or a larger reward later. For example, you can have $10 today or $11 tomorrow.
And classic economic theory says it is completely irrational to take the $10 today. Because like a 10% return on your money in a single day is mathematically superior to almost any investment you could make.
Logically, yes, it's a no-brainer.
I'm sure economic theory says it's irrational, but I know for a fact that if you put $10 in front of me on a bad day, I'm taking the $10. I'm not waiting.
You are definitely not alone. A significant number of participants take the immediate payout. But what's fascinating is that if the researchers change the time frame, say, they offer you $10 in exactly 1 year, or $11 in 1 year and 1 day, people suddenly become remarkably patient.
Almost everyone chooses the $11 then, right?
Almost everyone.
Because the distance makes it abstract. It's not right in front of them screaming to be spent. A year from now feels like a problem for a future version of me.
And the researchers used fMRI imaging to see exactly what was happening in the brains of the participants while they made these differing choices.
And what did the scans show?
They found that decisions involving an immediate reward, the $10 today, heavily activated parts of the brain associated with the limbic system, specifically the midbrain dopamine circuits.
So the emotion system's lit up like a Christmas tree.
Exactly. But decisions involving delayed rewards, regardless of the time frame, activated the abstract reasoning systems, the prefrontal cortex.
So it's a literal turf war in the brain.
A massive turf war.
The emotional limbic brain wants the $10 right now because it craves the immediate dopamine hit, while the logical prefrontal brain wants the $11 tomorrow because it understands abstract value.
Right. And when people choose the immediate reward, the imaging shows that the emotion-related parts of the brain successfully dominate and win out over the abstract reasoning parts.
They just overpower it.
As one researcher, David Laibson, summarized it, our logical brain knows we should save for retirement, eat vegetables, and go for a jog. But our emotional brain wants to max out the credit card, order a pizza, and sit on the couch.
Let's connect this back to that feeling of self-sabotage, especially when we are in the neutral zone of a life transition.
That's where it really applies.
When your self-concept is disrupted, say you've just been laid off and you have no idea what your career is anymore, you are under a prolonged, chronic state of stress.
Yes.
Your default mode network, the system that imagines your future self, is struggling to stay coherent. Your amygdala is on high alert because your survival feels threatened by the loss of income and status. In that state, the emotional system is constantly winning these neuroeconomic battles, isn't it?
It has a massive unfair advantage because the logical system requires a stable, coherent vision of the future to value the $11 tomorrow.
Right. If you can't picture the future, how can you invest in it?
Exactly. If your future is shrouded in fog, as you describe the neutral zone, the logical brain has no leverage. It cannot advocate for a future self that it cannot picture.
Wow.
The emotional brain, however, is feeling the acute distress of the present moment and demands immediate relief from the discomfort of the fog.
So when you blow your budget on a random Tuesday, buying things you don't need, or you snap and yell at someone because it feels good in that split second to release the internal tension, it's not because you are inherently self-destructive or a bad person.
Not at all.
It's because the biological system is screaming for immediate dopamine release, aggressively overriding the long-term goals of an identity that is currently offline anyway.
That is exactly the mechanism. The immediate gratification is a biological attempt to self-soothe a neurological system that feels under acute, relentless threat.
It's not just our future decisions that get warped, though, is it? It's our past. The way we remember things seems to physically break under this kind of pressure.
Yes, memory is highly vulnerable here.
We have a cluster of studies here, from the University of Hamburg, the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya, and the work of Dr. Sandra Bloom, that completely change how we should think about memory.
We tend to think of memory as a video recording that we just pull up on a screen. But it is not.
It really isn't.
It is a highly reconstructive process, and it is intensely vulnerable to the biological state you are in at the moment the memory is formed and the moment it is retrieved. The Hamburg study gives us a perfect look at how acute stress fundamentally alters this process.
This was the study looking at probabilistic classification learning. Break down the mechanics of that for us because it sounds intense.
It's simpler than it sounds. The researchers used a cognitive test called the weather prediction task.
Okay, how does that work?
Participants are shown complex patterns of cards and have to learn to predict whether the cards indicate it will be rain or sun. It's not a simple rule. They learn it gradually through trial and error, getting feedback after each guess.
Right.
Now, the brain actually has two different memory systems it can use to solve a task like this.
Two systems for memory.
Yes. The first is the hippocampus, which is your cognitive memory system. It's flexible, it builds complex associations, and it uses single cue strategies. It's the sophisticated system you use when you are consciously trying to learn a new rule or navigate a new environment.
Okay, so the hippocampus is the higher level narrative memory system. It's the system that remembers the context of a situation.
Precisely. The second system is the dorsal striatum. This is your habit memory system.
Habit memory.
It is much more rigid, less conscious, and uses multi-cue stimulus response strategies. It's the system that takes over when a behavior becomes completely automatic, like riding a bike or driving a familiar route to work.
Right, where you zone out and suddenly you're in your driveway.
Exactly. So the Hamburg researchers wanted to see what happens to memory retrieval when you introduce acute stress into the equation.
And they induce stress using the trier-social stress test, which is honestly one of the most diabolical things scientists do to people.
It is remarkably cruel.
For anyone who doesn't know, it's basically a scientifically calibrated nightmare. They make you stand up and do impromptu public speaking, and then perform complex mental arithmetic like counting backward in prime numbers in front of a panel of judges in white lab coats.
And the judges are explicitly instructed to maintain completely blank, unsmiling, judgmental facial expressions the entire time.
It is brutal. I would just melt into a puddle.
It is incredibly effective at spiking cortisol levels because it triggers profound social evaluative threat.
So what do they do with this test?
The researchers stressed half the participants 24 hours after they had initially learned the weather prediction task. Then they put everyone in an MRI scanner and tested their memory of the task.
And what happened to the stressed group?
They found that the stress-induced cortisol physically modulated the brain's retrieval strategy. It pushed the brain away from the flexible cognitive hippocampus and forced it to rely heavily on the rigid, habit-based dorsal striatum.
So the stress literally shifts the track the brain uses to pull up a memory. It derails the train from the thoughtful track to the automatic track.
The fMRI imaging showed increased activity in the dorsal striatum, and crucially, it showed reduced functional connectivity between the hippocampus and the amygdala.
What does that mean, practically?
Cortisol acts as a biological wedge, breaking the crosstalk between the emotional center and the cognitive memory center. It forces the rigid habit memory system to take total control.
I want to paint a real-world visual of this. If I am highly stressed, what does it actually feel like to have my memory shifted to this rigid habit system?
The study from the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya, the UOC, provides a brilliant practical visual of this phenomenon.
The airport study.
Yes, they created a highly immersive virtual reality airport simulation. Participants were asked to act as boarding gate employees. Their task was to identify specific passengers in a crowded terminal by checking both their faces and their names against a manifest.
A completely normal, context-heavy task.
Yeah.
You look at the person, you look at the paper, you take in the surroundings.
Normally, the brain builds associative memories in a very nuanced, rich way. It might connect a face with a place, noting the lighting, the color of the walls, the ambient noise, the whole context of the situation.
The hippocampus doing its job.
Right. But the researchers intentionally put the participants under prolonged high stress in the simulation. They cranked up the difficulty, the noise, the pressure.
And under that pressure.
The brain's memory strategy shifted radically. It stopped trying to remember the surrounding context and environment. It aggressively merged only the goal-relevant details into a single fused unit.
Wait, it just deleted the rest?
Yes, it merged the face and the name and entirely deleted the background room from the memory.
It's another efficiency calculation. The brain is looking around the busy airport and saying, I am under threat. I do not have the metabolic energy right now to remember the color of the carpet, or the song playing on the intercom, or the person standing to the left. I only need the threat data. Face, name, go.
Exactly. It ruthlessly prioritizes the aspects most relevant to immediate survival or the immediate task, and it diminishes or erases the rest. It fine-tunes the associative process for maximum efficiency, sacrificing context for speed.
This scales up so deeply when we look at Dr. Sandra Bloom's work on childhood trauma.
It absolutely does.
Because if we take that VR airport study, which is just a minor simulated stressor, and scale it up to severe, overwhelming trauma, we start to see why trauma survivors experience such profound memory fragmentation.
It's not just forgetting.
No. Dr. Bloom's summary of the science points out that traumatic memories are encoded fundamentally differently than ordinary memories. They don't go into the normal filing cabinet.
They cannot go into the normal filing cabinet. The extreme emotional arousal and the massive, overwhelming elevation in stress hormones change the very quality of memory formation.
She lists several specific mechanisms for how traumatic memories can be forgotten or fragmented. There's failure to encode, where the brain is so overwhelmed by the terror of the moment that it doesn't even lay down the memory file at the time of the event.
Right, the system is too flooded to record.
Then there's dissociation, which is an altered cognitive state where the mind detaches from the body, interfering entirely with the consolidation of the memory. And then there's state-dependent learning.
State-dependent learning is a critical concept here.
Explain that one, because it's wild.
It suggests that a memory encoded during a state of extreme terror and high cortisol might only be fully retrievable when the brain is put back into that exact same neurobiological state of terror.
Which explains so much about triggers.
It really does.
It explains why a specific smell, a certain tone of voice, or a relatively harmless comment from a loved one can act as a literal time machine.
Yes, it drops you right back.
It pulls you back into that neurobiological state. The amygdala fires up, the hippocampus disconnects, the default mode network shuts down, and you are suddenly acting out a rigid, habit-based survival memory without any of the logical context of the present moment.
More people carry both sides of this than you'd think.
I believe it.
We often judge ourselves so harshly for these reactions, viewing them entirely through the relational lens of a failing narrative self. We think, I am a bad person for reacting this way.
Right. We take it on as an identity failure.
But the biological lens shows us that the machinery is operating exactly as it was designed to. It is trying to save your life based on the data it has.
That feels like the most important thing we can do right now in this conversation. Remove the shame.
Absolutely. No shame.
If you are listening to this and recognizing yourself in these patterns, the impulsive financial decisions, the fractured memory, the sudden, overwhelming emotional reactions that make you feel like a stranger in your own body, you do not have to choose whether you are emotionally failing or biologically trapped.
Both are happening.
Both lenses hold a truth, and neither requires you to carry shame.
The challenge then becomes, how do we synthesize this without forcing a tidy resolution? Because we can't just fix the biology with a switch, and we can't instantly rebuild the psychology of a shattered identity.
Let's look at the psychological approach first, especially when you are in that prolonged, foggy, neutral zone of a life transition.
Right, when you're stuck on the bridge.
Exactly. The framework we pulled from the Embracing Imperfection Guide is built around 4 concepts: rest, reset, restart, redesign.
Which is a very deliberate progression.
It is.
Yeah.
But what struck me most about their approach is the emphasis on identity continuity. When you are in the fog, when your self-concept is disrupted, your instinct is to frantically write a massive 10-year life plan to force a new identity into existence.
To immediately solve the discomfort.
Right. But the logical brain can't process it anyway. You don't need a massive new plan. You just need to hold on to the fundamental things that remain true about you, regardless of your job title or location.
You hold on to core values. You hold on to characteristic ways of thinking and fundamental relationships. You maintain the baseline structures of the self while the larger narrative is offline.
You move with intention, making small, considered choices. The instinct, especially for high achievers, is to treat the transition like a project to be conquered with maximum efficiency.
Which backfires.
Totally backfires. Calm is not the absence of movement. Calm is the condition that allows for clearer movement. You have to give the transition the time it actually takes, which might be months or even years, without trying to brutally outthink a fractured state. You have to let the fog be fog.
And if we look at the immediate biological coping strategies, how to handle the acute amygdala hijack in the moment, it mirrors that exact need for a pause, just on a micro scale.
A micropause.
You can't always stop the hijack from happening, the thalamus is too fast, but you can learn to manage the aftermath before the behavior ruins a relationship.
What are the specific biological tools for that micropause?
One of the most simple and effective is the 6-second rule.
Just 6 seconds.
It takes a specific amount of time for the initial massive surge of stress chemicals to begin to dissipate in the bloodstream. Delaying any physical or verbal response for just 6 seconds can prevent the amygdala from entirely taking control of your actions.
Just 6 seconds to let the adrenaline and cortisol wash through the plumbing.
Yes. Another incredibly powerful tool is simply naming the emotion you are feeling.
That sounds almost too simple.
This sounds purely psychological, like a therapy exercise, but it has a deep mechanical biological function.
Oh, really? Yeah.
When you say out loud or even clearly in your head, I am angry or I'm feeling overwhelmed, you are forcing the brain to use language and analysis.
Okay.
Language processing lives in the frontal lobes, the higher cortex. By actively naming the emotion, you are physically forcing neural connections to shift back up to the higher cortex, pulling metabolic power away from the amygdala.
That is brilliant. You are using language as a grappling hook to pull your logical brain back online. You are throwing a rope up to the prefrontal cortex.
That's a great metaphor. And finally, breathing. Deep, slow, controlled breathing physically triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, which acts as the biological brake pedal to the amygdala's gas pedal.
The brake pedal.
Right. It forces a restful bodily response, lowering the heart rate, slowing the breath, which sends a bottom-up signal to the thalamus that the threat level in the environment is dropping.
What I love about this is the shared reality between the two lenses. Both of them require a pause.
They do.
The psychological lens requires the long, painful pause of the neutral zone, respecting that it takes months or years to rebuild a coherent self-concept.
And the biological lens requires the immediate pause of the 6-second rule, the grappling hook of language, or a deep breath.
Right. Both demand that we stop trying to immediately fix, solve, or outthink a fractured state.
They both ask us to endure the intense discomfort of not being in full control.
If we expand this out, if we look at the deeper connection running underneath all of this research, this tension isn't just about stress management or career changes or why we buy $10 items we don't need.
No, it goes much deeper.
Fundamentally, this is about loneliness and connection. When we are trapped in the neutral zone of a life transition, or when our default mode network goes offline under acute stress, what we are really experiencing is a profound fragmentation of self and others.
Yes.
We lose the narrative thread that connects us to the people we love.
Because the network that maintains your internal sense of self, the DMN, is the exact same network that processes your understanding of others.
They share the same address.
Exactly. When your self-concept powers down under threat, your empathy, your moral sensitivity, and your social cognition power down with it, you lose access to the very tools required for connection.
Which is why an identity crisis feels so intensely, crushingly lonely. The clinical research on generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, points exactly to this tragedy.
It really highlights it.
People with GAD experience chronic, uncontrollable worry. But the core issue is that they attach negative and faulty interpretations to completely neutral cues.
Because their threat system, the salience network, is constantly running.
Right. They literally perceive the neutral, safe world as harmful. They avoid situations, they pull away from people, they completely cut themselves off from connection because their brain is misinterpreting the data.
The biological override isolates them in an attempt to protect them.
And yet, here is the great, undeniable paradox of the human condition.
What's that?
This terrifying biological override, this aggressive, ancient system that shuts down your personality, floods your veins with adrenaline, fragments your memory, and alienates you from your modern sense of self, is the exact system that kept our ancestors alive long enough to build those beautiful social connections in the first place.
That is the paradox, isn't it?
The amygdala, the salience network, the rigid habit memory of the dorsal striatum, these are the ancient, ruthless guardians of our existence. We are only here to worry about our identity because that system worked.
The tragedy and the beauty is that the system designed to keep you alive is the exact system that makes you feel so lost.
If this conversation felt true for you, both sides of it, you're always welcome here. You can subscribe to Leone Patterns and keep sitting with us.
Let's just hold both of these truths for a moment.
Yeah. We are deeply relational beings. We desperately need a coherent story of who we are, a narrative that connects our past to our future, and links us meaningfully to the people we love.
And simultaneously, we are biological organisms, wired with an ancient, aggressive architecture that will instantly dismantle that beautiful story the second our physical or emotional survival is threatened.
Neither side wins. You don't get to just be a biological machine reacting to stimuli, and you don't get to just be a perfectly curated, uninterrupted story.
When I look at all this research from the neuroeconomics to the trauma studies, I am struck by how miraculous it is that our brains are so fiercely, relentlessly dedicated to keeping us alive, even when that dedication costs us our sense of peace.
And it leaves me thinking about the grace we have to afford ourselves and the people around us. When you are standing on that foggy bridge in the neutral zone, or when the chemicals finally clear after a hijack and you are looking at the relational wreckage, knowing that feeling lost, that feeling fractured, isn't a moral failure. It is simply the necessary price of transition and the heavy cost of being built to survive.
Same pace, same questions. See you then.